Hello, I'm Kelly Gellatly, and it's my pleasure to be in conversation with artist Darren Sylvester today on the occasion of his solo exhibition, Treasure Island, at Tweed Regional Gallery. Darren and I are zooming in from Naarm, Melbourne. So before we get things underway, we'd like to pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we both live and work, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge the important contribution of elders past, present and emerging. We also extend that same respect to the people of the Bundjalung Nation at Tweed Heads, where the exhibition can be seen, and to all First Nations people within Australia and beyond our borders who are joining us online. Welcome. Darren, how best to introduce you? You're a photographer, an installation artist of sorts, a creator of environments, a maker of experiences, and a storyteller. Regardless of medium, your practice draws on an array of pop culture, advertising and fashion references, but the works you create are far from quotations. Instead, they've got an immediate and unsettling resemblance to reality. We feel we know them and can recognise both the context, experience and emotions, be that shared desires, loss and longing, fear of death, the list could go on. Yet these are conveyed through recreations and fabrications. As you've said, and I quote, although we're in a culture that provides hopes and dreams, it never allows us to reach them. We're still terrible consumers and believers, always investing, yet knowing there's a diminishing return. So perhaps let's start with a rather obvious question. Why did you decide to call the exhibition Treasure Island? I'm thinking it's more of a sort of Disney-esque bent rather than Robert Louis Stevenson. Am I right?
Yes, very much so. I mean, I think that idea of like fabrication and building environments, etc., is very much a Disney idea. And I've been to Disneyland once, 5-6 years ago, and absolutely loved it. And
I love it.
I think it was, and I think it's just that idea of creating a world in your head, which is essentially my practice, and creating where that's my studio becomes the magic place that can I can build what I want, and that element of freedom of that to create a place I want to exist in. And that element is, very much of Treasure Island, the idea of discovering. And I think there's also a lot of sort of Easter eggs within my work. It appears in one sense it's an image or something like that, but there's often quite just a backstory in the way that it's made, but that the viewer doesn't need to know about or anything like that. It's just the way that the work is made is me going through various iterations of research to get to the end point. So yeah, Treasure Island was very much that a place that comes from visiting these little worlds like you do in Disneyland.
And I suppose, another thing for us Melburnians in the midst of winter, Treasure Island and Tweed Heads, although we can't be there at the moment, has that kind of,
Oh, totally, yeah.
Island exotic and God forbid sunshine.
Yeah, it was also a little bit of that too. I mean, I think I've mentioned that before, but I grew up I went to primary school in Byron Bay. So going to the Gallen-Mawullum and Tweed Heads and everything like that were all like magical places that we drove to on weekends. So that's also that came into my head too for this show.
The exhibition concentrates on photography, the medium that you obviously establish your reputation with, and one you remain very committed to. What's the appeal for photography for you? How does it help you sort of convey what you want in your work?
Well, yeah, I think it is really important, but even when I'm making work now, I kind of think mostly what I'm doing is sculpture all the time. I'm building in the studio. But the photograph is, if it's a world or a visage or an image that can't be put into sculpture, that you can't physically walk into, then photography to me is the best medium for that. if an object can exist in the space as a sculpture, and the idea becomes that it becomes a sculpture, or it becomes an environment. But there's something I think magical about the photographic process, that I can build something, and usually it's a combination of lights, some ephemeral stuff that we can't control, meaning maybe there's a person in it. And also there's a lot of like smoke and mirrors, literally, with smoke machines and lights and things to create atmospheres, because that's what I'm looking for. And that can't be done in a space. So there's something about creating that kind of, playing with that magic, and then using photography, particularly because I'm shooting on 4:5 and transparencies. So they're kind of difficult to shoot with. The camera's very big, it's upside down, blankets over my head, but using the power of those old school cameras, which just means I can pull depth of field out, I can twist things and manipulate things all in camera that you can't do digitally. And the use of film and transparency is a bit more like a glue. It joins everything better. I have shot digitally a little bit with artworks once, and I just didn't like it because the digital just reads too much information. There's no internal magic that a film has. And so there's something about having this amazing thing where it's wet and it's usually hot and there's dry ice and there's usually people and everyone's there and it's really busy, and then it's done in 2 to 3 hours after a week of setup, and then it's collapsed into this sheet of film, like 10 pieces, and then it becomes very controllable to me. That just becomes, that moment is just held. That's what the power of photo has, that we can't, we can't create that in real life. It's kind of weirdly a performative, which I never really thought about. There's a lot of like, sometimes there's 10 people on set kind of thing, to, you know, me yelling go with a thing going here and blow this here and this goes here and twist that light all in the second. It's quite, and we do that. But yeah, that's why photos are fantastic.
I'd read somewhere that you said it's like bottling lightning, and I think you've just summed that up beautifully. But it also, as you say, performance. But I mean, in that instance, you're like a film director, aren't you?
Yeah, well, it's literally on the film, moving that stuff. Yeah, so yeah, it's but even then, if it was like a film director with film, I'd find that much harder because, you know, there's more sense of narrative, and I've done video stuff before, but I find just controlling it into one frame is enough. But yeah, you're totally right. There's a performative. I mean, I was shooting the other day with dry ice and I didn't want to get the dry ice machine again. So I'm kind of by myself and I've got kettles and they're always boiling, and dry ice goes into a thing, and then I drop it in and it blows, and then I get cardboard and I shake it. It goes across the room, then I run to the back, and then I cut the shutter and then go bang before the smoke's down. And it takes like 2 minutes to do a photo, and then you go back, boil water, wait, turn, run, flip, and you kind of, there's a lot of stuff like that.
If someone could animate that, it's almost like a Looney Tunes moment.
Yeah.
But the end result is magical and very different.
Yeah, I think on the other Disney thing, I thought of this too recently, was just on that too, which talking about the new show, Bottled Lightning. But the other one I really thought of, which I thought was true, is that each artwork was my own little wooden Pinocchio. And so I kind of felt like more and more is that each work is this kind of construction of a creature or a boy that I wish to come to life, but it never does. So I think that was also another element that related to Treasure Island too, is that it's never quite going to be right. He's never going to turn into the little boy, but you know, you want them to anyway. So that's why there's that weird sense of fabrication and fakeness, but a little bit
not quite real.
Yeah, not quite real.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by the fact that many of your works start with writing, and that you can pull a line out of your writing, and that often becomes the inspiration for the creation of a work. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, just I'm just always writing notes to myself, which are either lines or things like that. I think I've done 3 by 9:30 this morning, and I usually wake up and then pull out what I did the night before. And so I think it was like 6 last night. So I'm constantly putting them into Word files of just sometimes they're just words that sound good together. And in the last 10 years of doing music or something like that, there was so much of that I could turn that into song lyrics. But usually I'm looking for some sort of magical turn of phrase or something like that, much like when you read a book and there's a memorable line or poetry. And that will often be a trigger to a sensation I might want to get across in either a sculpture or photograph. But that usually is just yeah, it's pretty clean and clinical. It's just always on my phone these days, just messaging to myself. I guess in the old days I would sit in front of, but it was in the old days, 15 years ago, I probably used notepads, but I don't do any of that anymore. It's all via the phone now. Just constant, yeah, anything. It's much faster. It's kind of like, yeah, messaging myself ideas is constant. And also, funnily enough, there's a Word file of just ideas. And there's like hundreds of art ideas just sort of ready to roll. Time and money holds you back. But yeah, that's kind of, when a show comes up, it's really just me curating. I just go through that list again and go, what is it that I'm wanting to draw out? What's the overarching thing I want it to be? And then I'm sort of curating those ideas together.
That's fantastic. Does that help you with that sense of, I imagine it's a bit like when you're writing, there's always that anxiety when you start something new. I don't know whether you suffer from this, but you don't know what you're doing, or that you always are starting afresh and again. And I imagine going to the studio sometimes like that, where you think, oh my God, but at least with that list, you've got that comfort of those first steps. Does that work that way for you?
Yeah, and that first kind of collection of what I pull out is invariably terrible because it's the beginning of something. And I always think back going, gosh, imagine if the show was like that first draft of ideas I threw down. Because you kind of realize after a while, that's a great idea. And as you kind of move forward with, there's an element of the dreaming, and then there's an element of the making and the doing. And sometimes when you're making, you're doing, you suddenly realize that this isn't possible.
Not going to work.
Or it looks terrible. Or once now that I'm sort of getting into the nuts and bolts of this idea loosely, I realize it's such a bad idea. And so you have to kind of work through that, where I go, I don't know what I'm doing. And it's kind of, in an artistic sense, very much procrastinating, and me sitting there in front of this computer and going, this combo of ideas. And to be honest, what stops me is a time, meaning there's a show somewhere down the 6 months away, and I know it's going to take 4 or 5 months to do everything anyway, so it needs to be like, we need to make that decision now. But then once it hits to that element of where I've said I'm then working and making work, there's still decision makings that are invariably continue in all those. Once you hit the working stage, I'm still like building sets, choosing lights and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff on the fly.
That's where the magic comes in, because you never see that in the images.
No, yeah.
You mentioned music, and I know that the show at Tweed Heads is a group of photographs, but music's such a big part of your practice, and I thought it might be interesting just to speak about that a little. You wrote and performed and produced your first album of pop songs in 2008. You bought the musical instruments and the recording equipment. You learnt to sing. That just seems terrifying to me. Played the instruments and recorded and mixed the album. And since then, you've released 2 further albums. Am I right? Off by Heart in 2013 and Touch a Tombstone in 2018. Why, Darren? Why? It's fascinating.
Well,
what is it about you? I mean, being an avid sort of fan of music is one thing. Taking on the whole undertaking yourself is something completely different. What inspired you to do that?
Well, there's that element of there's a lot of pop culture sort of depth within my work, and there was also just that element of being a pop music fan and going, that this opportunity is not going to be for me, meaning, I know it sounds weird, but it was something along the lines of 10, 15 years ago, you're never going to be a musician. You're not going to be that person. And so it was an element
paths in your life.
Yeah, I was like, I've got to do it.
Yeah.
I've got to figure out how to do it. And I was lucky enough in the art world to be given an opportunity where I pitched this idea that would be the idea. And they said yes. stupidly enough, or great. And so that was how the first one was done. And so I do, and I'd never done any singing or something, but I had played guitar, so I knew how to play that instrument. But it was, yeah. And to me, it was also, there was elements of, there's a building of something which I really love about it too, and I feel it's very close to my practice. It's just a different medium. There's a collection of lots of ideas. You're putting books together. There's like, this is the book of chords right in front of me. And so this is like where notes, this one, that all the songs are written. And in front of me, I'm a pretty good organizer. I think that's what it is. I'm just like, there's something about coloration of instruments. It creates that bottled lightning effect again of like the pop music of a 2 to 3 minute. I like that. I like the limitation. I like to be able to build the world between that in a song, which then builds across 10 songs, which almost feels like an exhibition. And there's album artwork and the visuals to it and so forth. So, and also learning how to mix and produce is very much like painting or sculpting. You're adding and you're taking away and you're cutting and refining. So, yeah, and I just like the structure of popular music, if you will, of using a formula to try and create something, which I guess is a pop song.
Yeah, and it's so much a part of so many forms of, or different periods of art practice, isn't it? Placing parameters around what you can or can't do, and then working within those limitations makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
We probably won't have the opportunity to speak about every work in the exhibition at Tweed, but can you tell us about, coming back to music, Forever 21? It seems to me it could be a sort of post-punk new romantic album cover from the 80s. I'm just showing my age here, but it's also completely or sort of strangely out of time.
Yeah, that one was, there's another artwork of mine called The Object of Social Something, is to Forfeit Individual Dreams, which is, I think, 2003. And because I had this survey show at the NGV, it was interesting to see that work again, which was a bunch of teenagers dressed in Gap clothing. I bought everyone Gap, and they stared at the camera. And I never really did that again. And I kept noticing it at the NGV, and I realized it would be interesting to update that again 20 odd years later. And there were two elements that I really liked. One was I also made an artwork for Neon Parc called Perfume Ghost, which was a mannequin which is like a ghost, and he had Calvin Klein's Eternity sprayed on the ghost. So it was like a ghost that would smell. And I also liked on YouTube the Calvin Klein Obsession ads, which were in a white studio with a staircase with dramatic lighting. And that was the initial idea of the artwork Forever 21, which was I wanted a white staircase. So that would have been a note I would have sent to myself: white staircase. That's the set. And then realizing that the Forever 21 was almost like a pop reference, and also to do with the idea of music and pop being for youth and for the young. And I guess just that idea of wanting to maintain it, even as heavenly white staircase. And I thought, who better than goth to do that? And the most difficult thing was to get 21-year-olds, because I wanted everyone in the picture to be 21. So that was really the stipulation of that artwork, is that it's really hard to find 21-year-old goths who wanted to be in photographs. And
with all that makeup, you wouldn't know either.
No, and they had to get makeup the same. So I mean, that was really performative too. It was a very stressful day to get everyone in and made up. But there was something about just that combo of the Calvin Klein, a perfume ad, the white staircase, and remaining 21 and being on the steps and a little bit, and then staring back at the camera. almost as a tag from a work 20 years earlier is how that work sort of came about. So all those kind of element threads come together to create the work. So it's never like the work is just there in my mind and let's go and do it. It's I think White Staircase existed by itself for like a year or something like that before what would be on the White Staircase. I think there's also just something interesting about the contrast of their a goth pallor of being white, and it's just a perspex floor. They're on a perspex floor with this kind of blind, and they're kind of in this sort of apartment block looking vibe. Yeah, very performative day as well to get everyone to get that picture right.
I can only but imagine, my goodness, because it's so controlled when the final image. There's that kind of blankness of faces, but the stare, as you say.
Yeah.
So interesting. You've captured fabulously how your works sort of start so tangentially in a way, and then through the research and the making, they take on a life of their own. I mean, you've obviously always been fascinated by space and space travel. I still remain amazed that you recreated a space blanket for a NASA space blanket for work. And in the exhibition, we've got the photograph Stacey, of course, in her sort of interstellar spacesuit. Can you tell us a little bit about how that work came into being?
Yeah, I mean, Stacey came across, just that was an element of me not really researching, but well, I was researching. I was glancing through a PDF of a Hollywood auction house, and just for fun. And you sometimes see movie memorabilia. But I mean, that work came about very simply by it. There was the suit, and it was worthless. And I thought that was such a terrible thing that they'd almost written in the line because it had no provenance. They didn't know where it came from. And just reading a little 2-line blurb, kind of saying it's worthless, no provenance, not sure where it came from or what time, only has the word Stacey in the back collar. And I just like, I don't know, it was something about my heart sinking automatically of like, I don't know if Stacey was the actress or Stacey's the character.
Yeah.
And so it just seemed like I should buy it. So I got that auction very cheaply and got
rescued it.
And I had that idea of that element of death in my work too, is like there's been drum machines and things that don't exist anymore, and then the idea is that you bring them back to life. So Stacey was like giving a character one chance to live again, which is what that work is. And so it was like a funny thing because the suit arrived and it's only like 5 foot tall or something like that. So again, it became like a casting issue of finding someone to fit it. And yeah, so brilliantly made, this little weird little outfit thing that came back. And sure enough, it has the word Stacey in the back. So there's just something like interesting, I guess, like putting a cork in a bottle and throwing it into the ocean kind of thing, of making this work called Stacey and doing it there. And again, I can joke about, is Stacey a person or a character? I don't know, but it's somebody. Somebody in America was called Stacey, and I don't know where they are now or if they're alive, because I think the suit was from the 60s. So we're looking at 50, 60 plus years ago. So there's something about just remembering that person who I don't know becomes like an interesting just feeling. And that's the artwork. That's all it is, really. It's just that feeling of someone who we don't know is remembered. That's the artwork. And that's almost what you would end up saying. Like, I read the word Stacey and I get that feeling, and I put down very quickly that the artwork idea is about just the remembrance of someone you don't know. And that's it. That's the whole work. Then comes the 3 months of building and making and so forth. And so that's where the play element comes in, I suppose.
One final question. It's really interesting when you read about your work that there is still this insistence, or in some sense, strange hope or holding on to the fact that your work is actually a critique of popular culture. But it's as you've showed, it's much more complex than that. And while your images are highly glossy, stylized, and play on all those sort of notions of aspiration, there's obviously a real warmth for your sources. Can you just finish up with a little bit, telling us a little bit about what your relationship to those sources is, sort of, be it pop culture, fashion, music?
It's just I think it's I am seduced by them. So I'm not really critiquing them because I find them quite successful in their job. And they wouldn't be successful unless they worked. And so there's an element of what those works are, or pop cultural images, whether they be glossy and seductive, that's for a discussion for other people. How do they play? How do they work on us? And I guess I just thought there's an element of adding to the tapestry, just in my own work, not to a work like Stacey's, or imagining someone who isn't there. It's not a documentary. I'm then using that kind of seduction of imagery to talk about that. It's almost like advertising the idea. It's almost like, in some ways, I'm making them look seductive so you will know about them too. I think that's maybe what it is. I'm not, because if I do consciously, as I'm making a picture, wanting to make it look good, whatever that means. I mean, I've often joked about the idea of, like, again, popular music, and talking about easy listening and sort of the Carpenters and so forth, about that kind of idea of a song that's so richly produced that then becomes so popular, it becomes synonymous on, say, Gold FM radio, where you hear the same songs over and over again. And that kind of collective unconsciousness of everyone knowing the same thing. The monogamous way of, like, a melody. There's something powerful in the whole world knowing that. And that comes back to that style of imagery, that the world is seduced by a similar type of imagery. And then maybe that also comes back to the Disneyland thing too. Like, there's something generic about Disneyland as well, but it's also, how do you have that magic through genericness or something? So yeah, the photos are often, they're done on film and they're super glossy because I am trying to make them look fantastic. I mean, I could just shoot them with my phone and go, here's the Stacey outfit, there you go, we move on. But that doesn't fulfill the major aspiration within the bit, to transform you, the viewer, in the space to another area, to get out of reality. Yeah, documentary doesn't interest me in any way, put it that way. Like, the idea of that, of like, I see documentary, I wake up and I have to go to work, or there's drudgery. I want art to be that kind of sense of absolute freedom and take me away from here. Just like you put headphones on and you go, like, get me away from here. That's kind of what it is. So if I'm in the studio too, it's that same thing of, like, I want to get out of here. And as I said, if we're doing a performance, there's lots of people, there's something weird about smoke machines, lights, it's all coming together. It's all the lightning in a bottle. And then the last shot's done, everyone claps, the fluoro lights come on, everyone's sweaty, it comes down, you step outside, it's a car park. And you kind of go, it's over. And I kind of go, like, there's something really exciting about that build up to that point, and then go, yeah, it's a great place to imagine and go to.
And you enable us to hold on to it.
Yes, I try to, yeah.
Oh, Darren, thank you so much for speaking so generously about your work today. It's been absolutely fantastic.
No worries. Thank you.
Thanks.